The group walked along the hallway to the portal that led back into the real world. They stepped through it into the spare bedroom where Henry and Veronica rested. Uncle Jake carried Puck to the shower while Granny and Daphne rushed off to greet the guests arriving downstairs. Sabrina, however, lingered, sitting down on the bed next to her parents. Henry and Veronica lay quietly as if they were enjoying an afternoon nap. Sabrina ran her hand across her father's stubbly beard and kissed her mother on the forehead. So far, the family hadn't found anything that could break the spell that kept her parents asleep. Sometimes in the still of night, Sabrina would wake up in a panic, convinced her parents were somehow conscious, feeling helpless and abandoned. She would creep out of bed and spend an hour or two looking over them, assuring them that she was working as hard as she could on a remedy for the enchanted slumber. A normal person would have probably been very disturbed by what Sabrina had just seen. A boy with wings, magical doorways, globe grenades, a wolfman, parents trapped under magic spells. But for Sabrina Grimm, it was just another day in Fairyport Landing. She hadn't always spent her afternoons in such odd surroundings. She had once been a normal girl living in New York City with her little sister Daphne and her parents. She remembered there had actually been times when she thought her family was boring. That all changed the night Henry and Veronica disappeared. The police searched high and low for them and found only one clue. The abandoned family car with a blood-red handprint painted on the dashboard. With no known next of kin, the girls were dumped into an orphanage and then into the foster care system, where they spent a year and a half bouncing from one certifiable lunatic to the next. They lived with paranoid schizophrenics, mean-spirited kids, angry animals, and every other weirdo the state would grant a child. When they were sent to live with their grandmother, Sabrina was sure the old woman was just another wackadoodle. After all, Sabrina and Daphne's grandmother was supposed to be dead. Their father had told them this himself. Of course, Granny Rhoda, as they eventually called her, didn't help her case much. She had a lot of crazy stories, including one in which the girls were the youngest living descendants of Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, also known as the Brothers Grimm. Granny Rhoda said the brothers' famous book of fairy tales was actually a history of true events. Along with other writing legends like L. Frank Baum, Rudyard Kipling, and Hans Christian Andersen, they had documented what they witnessed in order to warn the world about magical phenomena. In fact, she claimed, most of these storybook characters, who now prefer to be called ever-afters, still lived in their new hometown, Fairyport Landing. That was the good news. The bad news was every ever-after in town was stuck there, trapped inside a magical bubble set up by the great-great-great-great-grandfather Wilhelm Grimm to prevent a war between humans and fairy tale folk. Worse still, a lot of the ever-afters deeply resented the imprisonment, and many directed their anger toward the Grimm family. Naturally, Sabrina thought the old woman was off her rocker, until Granny Rhoda was kidnapped by a giant. The girls rescued her and were soon caught up in the fight to stop other deranged ever-afters from destroying the town. They discovered that all the bad guys they came across had one thing in common. They were members of a shadowy group known as the Scarlet Hand. No one knew how many ever-afters were members or who their mysterious master was, but one thing was for sure. The Scarlet Hand planned on taking over the world. Sabrina had fought her destiny for a long time. She wasn't interested in becoming a fairy tale detective like her father, grandmother, and everyone before them, even though her sister embraced the job. For Sabrina, the danger, chaos, and just plain craziness of the family occupation had taken some getting used to. Only recently, after a trip to New York City, had Sabrina realized that there were many ways to be a Grimm. She also realized it was time for her to give the family business a chance. Unfortunately, avoiding a globe grenade wielded by a mischievous flying boy was part of the package. Sabrina and Daphne's days were packed with training. lessons on clue finding, self-defense, crime scene investigation, tracking, and the use of magical items. The latter was a class Daphne excelled in, primarily because Sabrina didn't feel right around too much magic. She had learned that she didn't like who she became when she used it. She was addicted or touched, as some of the ever after said. Still, great fun might be useful if Sabrina understood how magic worked, and more importantly, how she might defend herself and her sister against it. The training never ended, and the pace was exhausting, but Sabrina was secretly enjoying herself, especially when it came to things she excelled at, like tracking and self-defense. She was a natural at clue finding, and she enjoyed criminal psychology, taught by former police deputies Borman and Swinehart. That's where the girls learned that thinking like criminals helped you catch them. All of it was fun, except for the glob grenades, of course. As Sabrina sat on the bed, she spotted a large bulbous head with thick muscular features and the ornate mirror she and her family had just stepped through. Mirror's face looked very indifferent when he was peering out at them. He could seem intimidating, almost frightening. Sabrina supposed this face was to protect the secrets that were hidden on the other side of the reflection. "How are the sleepyheads?" he asked. "The same," Sabrina said with a sigh. "Well, that's what the party is for. Maybe someone will have the key to wake them up." Sabrina nodded hopefully. "Granny asked everyone that's ever been enchanted over tonight. Daphne is nearly jumping out of her pants. She's in the princess phase." "All little girls have them," Mira said with a smile. "Not me," Sabrina said. Mira chuckled. "Of course not. You're rough and tough." "You bet I am," she said, ignoring his teasing. Mira had become a good friend since she and her sister had moved in with their grandmother. Unlike other enchanted items, the magic mirror was also a person, flesh and blood, though he couldn't leave the confines of the great hole inside his reflection. He had become a confidant to Sabrina, and she turned to him more than anyone else. He always seemed to understand how she felt. "By the way, you haven't told me what you want for your birthday yet." "It's 4 days away," he said. It's not easy to shop when you're trapped inside a mirror. My computer is still on dial-up. "The only thing I want is to find a way to wake them up," Sabrina said, looking at her parents. Miro shook his head pityingly. "It'll happen, Sugar Plum. Now you better get downstairs. I hear people arriving and you've got to keep an eye on your uncle. He's also going through a princess phase, from what I'm told." Sabrina laughed. "That's Uncle Jake. He's girl crazy." Mira's head faded from her reflection. Sabrina leaned over, kissed her mom and dad each on the cheek, and got up from the bed. "We're going to wake you up," she told them. "I promise." Chapter 2. The house was filled with guests, most of whom were very unusual. Among the crowd were witches, princesses, a dwarf, and a few knights of the round table. Everyone was munching on snacks and drinking punch. In one corner, Sabrina saw a trio of women known as the Three. They were a coven of witches who used to work for the former mayor of Ferryport Landing. They used magic to cover up things the ever-afters didn't want the town's human population to see. One of the women was Glinda the Good Witch, whose life was chronicled in L. Frank Baum's The Wizard of Oz. She wore an emerald green pantsuit and held a wand with a crystal star on its end. The second woman looked like she was 1,000,000 years old. Her name was Frau Pfefferkuchenhaus, otherwise known as the witch from the Hansel and Gretel story. Rounding out the group was the exotic and beautiful Morgan Le Fay, famous for her part in the story of King Arthur. The three were enjoying some crackers and soft cheeses while talking about something that had happened on a televised dancing contest. In another corner was a diminutive man in a black suit whom Sabrina had met on many occasions. Mr. Seven, as he was called, was better known as one of the 7 dwarfs. Like the three, he used to work for the mayor. Mr. Seven ate from a tray of green cookies set out on the dining room table. As Sabrina watched him, she felt something about him was different. It took a minute to realize that he wasn't wearing the dunce hat his former boss had always made him wear. Sabrina turned attention to Daphne, who was sitting on the family sofa wearing a shiny sequined tiara. Elvis, the family's 200-pound Great Dane, lay on the floor, resting his massive head in Daphne's lap. Snow White sat next to them. Looking at the beautiful woman was like looking at the sunrise for too long. Miss White was tall and lean, with skin like porcelain and eyes as blue as the sky. Sabrina wondered how many car accidents Miss White had inadvertently caused when drivers took their eyes off the road to catch a glimpse of her walking down the street. Besides her incredible looks, Mrs. White was a kind and caring person, as well as an expert in judo, karate, kickboxing, and bow staff fighting. She came to the groom house 3 times a week to train the girls in self-defense. Like Mr. 7 and the 3, Miss White was out of work, so she had plenty of free time. Ever since the new mayor took office, the school where she used to teach had been closed, and there was no news of when it would reopen. Unfortunately, the last 3 months had not been easy for Snow White. In addition to being unemployed, she was also suffering from a broken heart. After she reconciled with her former fiancé, Prince Charming, the couple looked as if they were headed down the aisle at last. But Charming had disappeared after he lost his re-election bid for mayor. Granny and the girls had searched high and low for him, but it was as if William Billy Charming had ceased to exist. Miss White was upset, but now she seemed particularly distraught. "Hello, Miss White," Sabrina said. "Huh? Okay. Huh? Oh, I'm sorry, Sabrina. Did you say something?" Miss White asked. "She's a little freaked out," Daphne said, pointing across the room. Sabrina returned and spotted another breathtaking woman standing with 2 plump fairy godmothers. Her name was Briar Rose, though most knew her as Sleeping Beauty. She had a dark honey complexion and eyes like hot chocolate. Her ever-present smile was soft, and she was a bit shy. She had been visiting the family a lot lately. Uncle Jake had asked her for help finding a cure for Henry and Veronica, and Miss Rose said she was happy to try. Sabrina knew her uncle had a crazy crush on the princess, but unfortunately, Miss Rose never went anywhere without her overprotective fairy godmothers, Buzzflower and Mallow Bob. The fairy duo had made it clear to Uncle Jake that they would not allow Briar to date him until he cut his hair and became royalty. Sabrina knew there was little chance of either happening. "Why? What's wrong with Miss Rose?" Sabrina asked her sister. "Charming used to be married to her," Daphne whispered. "Awkward," Sabrina whispered back. "I think I need some wine. Who wants some wine?" Snow White offered as she got to her feet. I'm 7, Daphne said. "Of course you are," Snow White said, walking toward the kitchen. Uncle Jake strutted into the room and over to Miss Rose. At once, Buzzflower and Mallow Bob stepped between them, blocking Jake as if they were linebackers protecting a star quarterback. "Poor Uncle Jake," Sabrina said. "He's got Google eyes for Briar," Daphne replied as she gave Elvis's ears a good scratching. The big dog's back leg tapped the floor happily. "You know what? I think we need to find Elvis a girlfriend." Elvis snorted, garbled a grunt, and skulked out of the room. "What did I say?" Daphne cried. "I guess he's a bachelor," Sabrina said. Someone knocked on the door, and Granny rushed through the room to answer it. Sabrina and Daphne watched as a sun-soaked blonde woman and an elderly man with a cane entered the house. That seems to be the end of this video. I'll send more later. Goodbye.